Picture this. The year is 1387. England is a land of muddy roads, plague scars, and political turbulence, and one of the king's own bureaucrats, a man named Geoffrey Chaucer, sits down and begins writing something that will change English literature forever. The Canterbury Tales isn't just a book. It's a world. A loud, chaotic, brilliant world filled with knights and con artists, lovesick scholars and sharp-tongued wives, holy men who aren't very holy at all. And it all begins with a simple idea. A group of strangers, bound for the same destination, decide to tell each other stories along the way. Chaucer is widely called the father of English poetry, and this work is exactly why. Before the Canterbury Tales, serious literature in England was written in French or Latin. Chaucer chose Middle English, the language of the people. That decision alone was revolutionary. To understand the Canterbury Tales, you need to understand the world it was born from. Late 14th century England was a society under pressure from every direction. The Black Death had swept through Europe just decades earlier, wiping out a third of the population. The survivors found that old social rules, who owed deference to whom, who held power, who deserved wealth, suddenly felt very negotiable. The church, which was supposed to be the moral compass of society, was riddled with corruption. Priests sold forgiveness. Bishops accumulated enormous fortunes, and ordinary people were watching it all happen. Scholars, like Donald Howard, in his landmark 1976 study, The Idea of the Canterbury Tales, argue that Chaucer was deeply attuned to this crisis and used his pilgrims to dramatize it. Meanwhile, a new middle class was emerging. Merchants, lawyers, craftsmen, people who were neither noble nor peasant, but who had money and ambitions. Chaucer knew this world intimately. He worked as a customs official, a diplomat, a royal servant. He had sat at tables with kings and walked streets with labourers, and he put all of it into his pilgrims. The setup is elegant in its simplicity. One April evening, and Chaucer's opening lines about April showers are so famous that T.S. Eliot deliberately echoed them in The Waste Land. A narrator finds himself at the Tabard Inn in Southwark, on the outskirts of London. He's about to make his own pilgrimage to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket at Canterbury Cathedral, about 70 miles away. Becket was the Archbishop of Canterbury, murdered in his own cathedral in 1170 on the orders of King Henry II. His shrine had become one of the most important pilgrimage sites in England, part religious devotion, part tourist attraction. At the inn, the narrator meets a company of about 30 pilgrims who are also headed to Canterbury. Their host, Harry Bailey, likely based on a real innkeeper whose tax records survive, proposes a contest. Each pilgrim will tell 2 tales on the way there and 2 on the way back. The best storyteller wins a free dinner at everyone else's expense. And just like that, we have our frame. This technique, a story containing other stories, is called a frame narrative. Chaucer borrowed it from traditions including Boccaccio's Decameron, written in Italy just decades earlier. But where Boccaccio's characters were aristocrats isolated by plague, Chaucer's are a cross-section of an entire society, crammed onto one muddy road to Canterbury. The general prologue gives us vivid snapshots of each pilgrim, And this is where Chaucer's genius for character really shines. These aren't abstractions, they feel like real people. At the top of the social ladder, the knight. He's everything. A medieval knight is supposed to be honourable, battle-scarred, genuinely humble. Chaucer doesn't satirise him. He's the ideal. Held up as a measuring stick for everyone else. Alongside him rides his son, the squire, a charming curly-haired young man more interested in singing and impressing women than crusading. Then things get complicated. There's the prioress, a nun who weeps over mice caught in traps and feeds her dogs better than the poor are fed. There's the monk, who has zero interest in monastic life and prefers hunting. The friar is perhaps even worse. He's supposed to hear confession and give aid to the needy, but he only visits rich households where he might get a meal. And then there's the wife of Bath, Alisoun. She is, by almost any measure, the most fully realised character in the entire work. She's been married 5 times. She's opinionated, sensual, well-travelled, and absolutely unapologetic. She argues loudly, convincingly, that women should have authority in marriage. Scholars like Caroline Dinshaw, in her book Chaucer's Sexual Poetics, have analysed her as one of literature's earliest feminist voices. She gets an entire prologue before her tale even begins. On the other end of the spectrum, the pardoner. He sells papal indulgences essentially, church, certified forgiveness, and he doesn't believe in any of it. He openly tells the other pilgrims that his entire ministry is a scam before going right ahead and trying to sell them relics anyway. He is simultaneously the most cynical and the most fascinating figure in the book. Then you have the miller crude, loud, red-faced, plays the bagpipes, tells filthy stories. The clerk, a quiet, impoverished Oxford scholar who loves books more than food. The franklin, a wealthy landowner who loves pleasure and sets a lavish table. The reeve, a sharp, bitter old man who manages an estate and has already outlived his usefulness. Each portrait is both a type and an individual. Chaucer is doing what we now call estates satire, using recognisable social roles to expose how badly people live up to their supposed functions. But he does it with humanity and humour, not cold contempt. Chaucer only completed 24 of the 120 tales he originally planned. But what he did complete contains multitudes. The Knight's Tale opens the contest. It's a courtly romance about 2 knights, Palamon and Arcite, who fall in love with the same woman, Emily, whom they can only see from their prison window. It's noble, elevated, beautiful, and probably a little dull to the miller, who immediately interrupts. The Miller's Tale is the counterpunch. It's a ribald comedy about a carpenter, his young wife, and 2 men trying to sleep with her. It ends with a red-hot iron, a fake prophecy of a second Noah's flood, and spectacular humiliation all around. The contrast with the Knight's Tale is deliberate. Chaucer is showing us how the same subject, love, desire, competition, looks completely different depending on who's telling the story. The Wife of Bath's tale is set in King Arthur's England. A knight rapes a woman and is sentenced to death unless he can discover what women most desire. He searches for a year, finds no consensus, and finally, a hideous old woman offers him the answer: women want sovereignty over their husbands. She's right, he's pardoned, and she reveals herself to be beautiful. But there's a catch. She was the one who told him. It's Chaucer's most direct engagement with questions of gender and power. The Pardoner's Tale is a moral fable gone dark. 3 riotous young men go looking for death, literally. They intend to kill him and find a pile of gold under a tree instead. They end up killing each other over it. The moral is that greed is the root of all evil. The irony is that the pardoner who profits from other people's guilt tells it perfectly, and then tries to sell the pilgrim's forgiveness immediately afterward. The nun's priest's tale is perhaps the most playful, a barnyard fable about a rooster named Chanticleer, who almost gets eaten by a fox. It's simultaneously a comedy, a mock epic, and a meditation on fate and free will. It references Boethius, Cicero, and classical mythology about a chicken. So what is the Canterbury Tales actually about, beneath all the stories? The first big theme is social satire. Medieval society was theoretically organised into 3 estates: those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. The Canterbury Tales systematically shows how badly every estate is actually functioning. The clergy are corrupt, the nobility is out of touch, and the workers are resentful. Chaucer doesn't moralise about this, he just shows it with a wry smile. The second is the question of truth and perspective. No single tale in the Canterbury Tales is definitive. The knight sees the world one way. The miller sees it completely differently. The wife of Bath's version of marriage contradicts the clerk's version completely. Lit charts and scholars like Helen Cooper, whose Oxford Guides to Chaucer remains a standard reference, emphasise that the tales don't resolve these conflicts. They hold them in tension. This is remarkably modern for a medieval text. The third theme is church corruption. The pardoner, the summoner, the friar, the monk, virtually every religious professional in the book is exposed as failing their calling. And yet, the work ends with the parson, an honest village priest delivering a genuine sermon. Chaucer isn't anti-religion, he's anti-hypocrisy. The fourth is the nature of storytelling itself. Chaucer was acutely aware that he was conducting a literary experiment. Stories in the tales comment on other stories. Characters react to each other's tales. The miller tells his story partly to insult the knight. The reeve tells his to insult the miller. The tales are not just entertainment, they are arguments, disguised as entertainment. Geoffrey Chaucer died in 1400, leaving the Canterbury Tales unfinished. We don't know the order he intended for all the tales. We don't have a single manuscript in his own hand. What we have are 84 surviving manuscripts, copied by scribes, who each made their own decisions about ordering and editing. And yet the work survived. It was among the first books printed in England by William Caxton in 1476. It influenced Shakespeare, who borrowed from its plots. It influenced Keats, who loved its sense of beauty and earthiness. It influenced T.S. Eliot, who both echoed and subverted its famous opening lines. But beyond direct influence, the Canterbury Tales did something foundational. It proved that English, not French, not Latin, was a worthy language for great literature. It gave England a literary identity. Harold Bloom, in The Western Canon, called Chaucer one of the central figures in the tradition of Western literature. That's not hyperbole. The pilgrims of the Canterbury Tales are still recognisable. You know the knight you know the Pardoner. You definitely know the Wife of Bath. Because Chaucer wasn't just writing about medieval England. He was writing about human beings ambitious, hypocritical, funny, lustful, kind, corrupt, searching human beings. And human beings haven't changed all that much. For further study, some excellent resources. Helen Cooper's Oxford Guides to Chaucer, the Canterbury Tales for serious scholarship, the Riverside Chaucer, edited by Larry Benson for the original Middle English text with notes. SparkNotes and LitCharts both offer solid summaries and theme analysis for each individual tale. And for a readable modern translation, Neville Coghill's Penguin Classics version is the classic choice. The Canterbury Tales is nearly 640 years old, and it still has things to say to you. That's the mark of a masterpiece.